What if thousands of court documents began to surface, naming powerful figures, secret flights, hidden settlements, and sworn testimony, all tied to one massive criminal investigation? Not rumors, not leaks, actual court records. They became known as the Epstein Files, and they continue to fuel debate, controversy, and investigation years after the case first broke. But what are these files really? What is confirmed fact, and what is just an allegation, and why are courts still unsealing documents today? This is a deep, evidence-based breakdown of the timeline, the documents, the legal battles, and what the records actually show. For decades, Jeffrey Epstein was a fixture in elite social circles. He presented himself as a high-level financier and a trusted advisor to extremely wealthy clients. He was a major donor to prestigious institutions and built a sprawling network of relationships that spanned politics, science, and business. But even as he built this image, many who looked closely at his career noted something strange. There was almost no transparent record of how he actually built his immense fortune. Many of the questions people have today are not just about him, but about who he knew and what they knew. The story starts to turn in the mid-2000s, when authorities in Florida began investigating disturbing allegations involving underage girls. Soon, federal investigators got involved and began preparing a much larger, more serious case. It seemed like a major federal indictment was on its way. But instead of a full federal trial, a plea agreement was reached in 2008. This deal has become one of the most controversial legal agreements in recent memory. It allowed Epstein to avoid federal prosecution entirely. Instead, he served a short sentence in a local county jail, which even included work release privileges that allowed him to leave the jail for most of the day. Critically, the deal also protected any potential unnamed co-conspirators from federal charges at that time. Years later, judges and victims' attorneys would fiercely criticize this agreement, arguing that it was a profound miscarriage of justice that denied victims their day in court. While the criminal prosecution had stalled, the story was far from over. This included depositions taken under oath, testimony from internal staff members, details about how his properties were operated, descriptions of how victims were recruited, and references to his powerful associates. Depositions are a critical part of this. They are sworn, recorded, and legally binding testimony given outside of a courtroom. In these cases, many of the depositions and other documents were initially sealed by the court, meaning they were restricted from public view. But over the years, relentless legal challenges from journalists and victims' attorneys pushed the courts to review and release portions of this sealed archive. That growing collection of court-released documents is what we now call the Epstein Files. So, what do these files actually contain? It's important to understand they are not a single, tidy database. They are a collection of documents from multiple legal cases. But here is a crucial legal distinction that often gets lost in the headlines. A person being named in testimony is not the same as that person being charged with or found guilty of a crime. In a deposition, a witness can mention all sorts of things: social contacts they saw, people who made introductions, meetings that happened, or who was on a particular trip. The courts are very clear on this. A mention does not equal guilt. It's a lead, a piece of information, but it isn't a verdict. The private jet flight logs in particular drew major public attention when they were released. They listed passengers and routes on his planes over many years. Media headlines immediately focused on the famous and recognizable names found on those lists. But legal analysts and investigators consistently warn against jumping to conclusions. Aviation records prove one thing: travel. They prove a person was on a plane from one point to another. They do not, by themselves, prove what that person did, what they knew, or why they were there. That requires corroborating evidence. It was the full federal case that many felt should have happened a decade earlier. For the first time in years, a full-blown federal trial seemed inevitable. Because the trial never happened, a huge amount of evidence was never presented publicly, and testimony was never tested under cross-examination. This absence of a final public accounting only intensified the demand for the release of all the documents connected to his case. The story continued with the arrest and trial of his longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. So, with all of that history, why are documents still being released today years later? It comes down to a balancing act that the courts must perform. On one side, there's the public's right to know and the principle of transparency. On the other, there are the rights to privacy and due process for every individual named in the files. Judges have to review these documents page by page, sometimes line by line. Some information is unsealed and made public. Other parts are redacted or blacked out to protect identities. And some documents remain sealed entirely. Each time the court releases a new batch, it renews public attention and debate. We know multiple victims have bravely come forward to testify. We know that the civil and criminal cases produced an extensive archive of records. And we know that Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted for her central role. What is not confirmed are the many claims tied only to a passing mention in testimony, the interpretations that go far beyond any court findings, and the wild online conspiracy theories that have little basis in the documents themselves. The Epstein Files are a complex legal archive, not a simple verdict list. Understanding them requires careful reading, a respect for evidence, and a commitment to separating fact from assumption. Thanks for watching.